That was helpful for the Secretary of the Treasury to cast a little bit more light on that. You know, far be it from Donald Trump to withhold any suspense from us. Basically, the 2 days of negotiations that we had by the Chinese Vice Premier, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, the Ambassador on Trade, Jamieson Greer, ended a couple hours ago. Then they briefed the media, and it ended, it seemed initially, by the Chinese saying that they basically a 90-day pause, the continuation of the truce between the United States and China, that would continue for another period of time. They didn't specify the period of time. Then we started to hear from the Americans with a slightly different story, that basically this is still conditional to Donald Trump's approval. We understand that Scott Bessent did speak with Donald Trump after the conversations before he gave that press briefing, but he's going to give a more complete briefing a little bit tomorrow in the Oval Office in the White House in order to get the final sign-off from Donald Trump, who may, you know, change his mind, may demand something else. But again, the deadline that we're facing here is August the 12th, when these tariff rates will shoot right back up. So for the market, this is really a crucial thing to get over the line.
Interestingly enough, at least the equity market not reacting much to this news. Perhaps it was priced in. Perhaps there was the expectation that there would be some sort of extension here. I want to go to rare earths specifically, Oliver, and what we learned about the way that rare earths, not just today, but really over the last few months, have taken center stage when it comes to these negotiations. What do we know about that?
Well, what I think is interesting is that there were concessions on rare earths. There were concessions in exchange for that on the H20 chips by NVIDIA, by the United States, the allowing of selling them into China. And we should say that, you know, one could interpret this as a sort of act of goodwill on both sides in order to try to make progress. But the reality of the situation is that for each of these economies, they're dependent on the other. There is no alternative for these technologies. This is not just an act of goodwill. This is the leverage that China holds over the United States. It is the leverage that the United States holds over China. And they did manage to make some breakthroughs on that. And again, this is something that was active in the discussions with the delegation from China and the United States today. We heard from Jamieson Greer saying that I don't want to talk about magnets basically ever again. As far as they're concerned, the magnets should be flowing. They are flowing now, and that this should be a closed topic, and that they can then put that aside in order to make progress on the many other issues that are you know, large issues between China and the United States. They'd like to basically put an end to it. And as far as they're concerned, they hope it's done.
All right, Oliver, back in June, President Xi of China, we know, invited President Trump to Beijing. Are the two leaders talking at all during these talks, or are they just waiting until, I don't know, the final terms? What's kind of going on behind the scenes here?
Yeah, I mean, our impression is that the last time that they spoke, this came up during the press conference, was in the call that they held in June. We understand that Xi Jinping did invite Donald Trump and the First Lady, Melania Trump, to China at some point. There has been some discussion today. I think there was a Donald Trump truth saying that basically he's not seeking a discussion with President Xi Jinping, but he has been invited. But this is really at the crux of the issue here, right? The Chinese, in the last few decades, have been building out their economy, have been building out their status on the global stage. They don't want to be seen sort of bowing theatrically to the United States on these trade issues. The Europeans have much less of a problem with that. They're being much more pragmatic about these sorts of things. But for the Chinese, this is not just about trade. This is about their status on the global stage. And I'll remind you that in Trump 1, the first Trump administration, these trade negotiations between the Chinese and the United States, they were held in Washington, D.C. These discussions today are being held in Geneva, the United Kingdom, in Stockholm, in neutral sort of third-party places. And we've seen what China's appetite is to escalate this trade war if they have to. They shot the tariffs up to 125%, which is how we got to this truce. But that is the sort of dynamic going into this. Both leaders want to appear strong and need to exert their leverage on the other.
What are the questions that remain unanswered at this point in terms of the details, the nitty-gritty, and what really needs to be hashed out here?
Yeah, so there are a panoply of different issues. For example, there's the issue of TikTok, right? There is a buyer potentially for TikTok in the United States. So says Donald Trump. The Chinese still need to give a nod to sell that. That is apparently something that did not come up in these conversations. There is the question of fentanyl. Bessent says that he is not pleased with how things have been progressing there. China could still be doing more. I mean, there is the issue of Russia, which increasingly we've seen Donald Trump change his position on Russia and Vladimir Putin. And we had a large discussion apparently between the two delegations today on the question of Russia. And Scott Bessent, again, airing their displeasure at the continued buying of fossil fuels, both from Russia and China, but also that dual-use military technology that they're seeing increasingly on the battlefield in Ukraine. So these were active discussions. And then there's also this question of the secondary sanctions that Trump is now talking about imposing on people who buy crude oil from Russia if Putin does not come to the negotiating table in the next 10 days. This came up in the press conference. And when asked asked, whether or not the Chinese position had altered, Scott Bessent said basically the Chinese take their sovereignty very seriously. They don't really want to be told what to do. And if they want to pay 100% tariffs as a consequence of buying Russian oils, then they will.
Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent said, we understand China's agenda much better. What is really the Chinese agenda? What is really the U.S. agenda? Is it just for both to kind of get wins here ultimately?
Well, what's interesting is, again, what we see the dynamic with the European Union and the United States. You have a situation with Japan, the UK, the EU, where they almost want to appear to be giving more to Trump than they are, sort of potentially giving these sort of, big sort of sweeping statements of committing to buying, $750 billion of energy, investment pledges of $600 billion. These are sort of big concessions. But again, there is a lot of room to fudge these sorts of things. With China, you have sort of the opposite dynamic, where the Chinese do not want to appear to be giving more. They want to appear to be giving less. And I think that really is the tone in these discussions. And I think that, again, what this meeting was supposed to do was to kick the can down the road another 90 days. You didn't get that today. I think that everyone is hopeful. And we should say, overall, the tone that we got from this press conference, from the ambassador and from the Treasury Secretary, they were saying that these were very, very constructive discussions. And even if we didn't get a deal today, they sort of were signaling, just maybe why you're seeing modest reaction in the market, that they will get it over the line.